I took care of my wife in a vegetative state for over a decade. When she finally woke up, she despised me, blaming me for ruining what she called her true love. Even while I was driving a taxi late at night, she rekindled her old flame with the very person who had caused her paralysis. In a moment of losing control, my car crashed into the roadside, and I died on the spot. When I opened my eyes again, I had returned to the turning point of everything. When I regained consciousness once more, time had rewound, and it seemed as though everything had the possibility of starting anew. At that moment, Lydia looked at me with righteous indignation and said, "Zach, give the guaranteed admission spot to Cale. I don't want to owe him a favor." I looked at her deeply and decided that in this lifetime, I would never have any entanglement with her again. Later, I ended up with Mia, the class monitor who had always had a crush on me, while Lydia, who had lost both legs above the knee, went mad. Lydia, wearing a faded school uniform, looked at me with an air of arrogance and said, "Zach, go tell the teacher to give up the guaranteed admission spot. That way, Cale's family can pull some strings and fill the vacancy." The Lydia before me was full of pride and vitality, and for a moment, I felt a bit dazed. In my memory, she had been bedridden for over a decade, reduced to nothing but a shell of a person. I instinctively took a step back, steadying myself to avoid stumbling. Lydia, seeing that I didn't respond, grew unhappy. "Zach, Cale has privately arranged with the cafeteria, so I always get such generous meals. I don't want to owe him anything, and you wouldn't want me to owe someone a favor either, right?" Hearing her say this, my whole body stiffened. I slowly raised my eyes and stared straight at her, only to see her face full of self-righteousness. I couldn't help but let out a cold laugh, took a deep breath, and my eyes were filled with sarcasm. "I should back off. What does he have to do with me? Ridiculous. If Cale is so rich and capable, let him pay to beg me." Lydia widened her eyes, looking utterly incredulous, as if she were seeing me for the first time. Her face gradually turned angry, and she stared at me intently, saying, "Zach, how could you say such a thing? How can you be so materialistic, actually asking for money? Do you want me to owe him a favor and feel inferior to him? Do you want me to be constantly pestered by him? How have you become so selfish?" After saying that, she coldly tossed out a line, "I know you're upset, but you should prioritize what's important." Then, she walked away without looking back, as if certain I would do as she asked. I stared intently at her retreating figure, unable to help but clutch my chest, my emotions churning inside, nearly overwhelming me. I truly couldn't understand how someone could be so dismissive of others. In my previous life, I eagerly agreed to her request, afraid she might have any connection with Cale. On the very first day Cale transferred into our senior year class, he loudly announced his intention to pursue Lydia. From then on, he showered her with attention daily, from big gestures like designer bags and celebrity autographs to small ones like breakfast and rides home. Lydia always appeared indifferent on the surface, never giving Cale a friendly look, whether in class or in front of me. Yet she never refused any of his gifts. After finishing the bird's nest porridge he sent, she would say arrogantly, "Cale, can't you focus on your studies? What's the point of sending food every day? I don't want to owe you any favors, but I also don't want to waste food." Cale kept saying, "Yes, yes, yes," but he only became more diligent in sending gifts. I privately advised Lydia that if she didn't like him, she shouldn't give him hope. Lydia, however, angrily accused me, "Zach. What do you mean? Are you saying I'm stringing along a sucker? How dare you belittle me like that?" Lydia's accusations left me disheartened, and I gradually distanced myself from her life, focusing entirely on preparing for the college entrance exam. But who could have imagined that an accident would come so suddenly, easily altering the course of my life that I had built over more than a decade? A few days before the college entrance exam, Cale's mother found Lydia and slapped her in front of everyone, accusing her of seducing her son. While cursing, she threw out a pile of bills, all of which were expenses Cale had spent on Lydia. Lydia's face flushed with anger as she retorted indignantly, "You think I like your son? Let me tell you, he's the one clinging to me. It's your son who acts like a shameless dog, begging me day and night. I only gave him some face out of our classmate bond." Do you really think I care about his insulting, filthy money? Lydia screamed at the top of her lungs, completely unaware of Cale's livid expression behind the door. Cale immediately grabbed Lydia and ran off. Filled with worry, I tried to stop them, but all I got was an impatient glare from Lydia, telling me to mind my own business. I could only wait anxiously, never expecting to receive news of their car accident. Cale was riding his motorcycle with Lydia, speeding recklessly, when they collided with a truck. Cale was thrown far away, unconscious, while Lydia was run over by the vehicle, suffering fractures all over her body. The doctor diagnosed her with lifelong paralysis, unless a miracle occurred. The words, vegetative state, so easily sentenced her youth to a death sentence. Lydia's ignorant parents favored sons over daughters. After taking a sum of money from Cale's family, they abandoned her, planning to send her back to their hometown to fend for herself. Without hesitation, I stepped forward and said I was willing to take care of her. Ignoring the confusion of my teachers, classmates, and even Lydia's parents, I firmly dropped out of school and gave up the college entrance exam. For over a decade after that, I took on various odd jobs and drove a taxi in my spare time, all for the sake of flexible hours to care for Lydia. Everyone who knew the situation couldn't understand me, calling me foolish behind my back and saying I was out of my mind. But only I knew that when my parents died in a car accident, it was Lydia who stayed by my side and comforted me. She was the light in my dark life, supporting me through those painful days. We grew up together, companions for over a decade, and this bond meant more to me than anything else. I was willing to sacrifice everything for this light, even my entire life. However, if a person cannot let go of themselves, that too is a kind of sin. Lydia miraculously woke up, and I was overjoyed. But after she regained consciousness, there was no gratitude, no joy, only confusion and loss. Her smile was stiff, and she seemed to want to say something to me but couldn't, looking utterly awkward. I thought she needed time to adjust, but it was all just self-deception. Late at night, while I was rushing around the city, the surveillance footage showed her with Cale, who had been married for years. Their love truly is something grand. Lydia's love is so elusive, she can fall for the person who harmed her, yet despise the one who cared for her for years. My sincerity was ruthlessly trampled into the dust, the rising dust humble and insignificant. I am the biggest joke in the world. Zach, you can't really be giving up your guaranteed admission. Don't be foolish. A childish yet stubborn voice suddenly rang in my ears. I snapped out of the whirlpool of memories. It was the class monitor, Mia. She walked up to me with a displeased expression, looking me up and down. Suddenly, I remembered how incredulous and heartbroken she had looked in my previous life when I gave up on the college entrance exam. She had even gathered a lot of study materials for me, hoping I would take the exam again and not give up so easily. Back then, she was full of expectations for me, and looking back, that was love. I reined in my weary gaze and said hoarsely, Mia, I've decided to give up the guaranteed admission. What are you saying? It's Lydia again, isn't it? Mia grew anxious. I looked at her with determination in my eyes. No, it's because I believe I can get into my dream university. Mia was stunned, not expecting me to say that. I looked at her, a smile lighting up my eyes. Mia, could you help me with my studies? Of course I can. Mia replied, her face flushing as she hurried back to the classroom with small, quick steps. I quickly found my teacher and told him I wanted to withdraw from the guaranteed admission. After thinking for a moment, he encouraged me with a few words and agreed. During the evening self-study break, Lydia found me with a smug look on her face. Zach, I knew you weren't that kind of person. You couldn't bear to see me owe Cale a favor. I didn't even glance at her and kept walking straight ahead, not wanting to deal with her at all. Lydia grabbed me by the arm. Her face was slightly flushed, and upon closer inspection, there was a hint of excitement in her eyes. She lowered her voice and said, Zach, could you tell the teacher I'm not feeling well and need to go home early to rest? I gave her a cold look. She cleared her throat awkwardly and said, it's just that Cale planned some confession ceremony. I didn't want to go, but with the college entrance exam coming up, I need to talk him out of it and tell him to focus on what really matters. Besides. She tried to make excuses, but I quickly walked away. Lydia called out unhappily, "Zach, what's wrong with you? Are you jealous?" The only response she received was my silent and resolute back. Instead, she smiled triumphantly, watching me from afar as if I were already in her grasp. During evening self-study, when the teacher asked me, I simply said I didn't know and continued seeking help from Mia. I was frantically absorbing high school knowledge. Although more than a decade had passed, I had once been a top student, and over the years, I had also worked part-time as a tutor. So, apart from subjects like Chinese and history, I was confident about the college entrance exam. Thinking of this, I pointed to a major problem and said to Mia, "Mia, I think this question will definitely be on the college entrance exam." Upon hearing this, Mia's ears turned red as she lowered her head to look at this notoriously difficult problem that had stumped many during the college entrance exam. After school, I hurried home with the notebook Mia had given me. Unexpectedly, I ran into Cale, who looked hostile. After all these years, he was still as arrogant and domineering as ever. As soon as he saw me, his eyes turned red, blood rushing to his head, and he roared angrily, "Zach! Do you even have any self-respect? You're just a poor orphan with no parents, what right do you have to cling to Lydia? Are you even worthy?" I stopped in my tracks, turned around, and fixed him with a sharp glare. "Cale, watch your mouth. Lydia is destined to be yours in this lifetime. I swear I'll stay far away from her forever, so don't make up lies here." Cale sneered and pointed at me viciously. "Still denying it? I just confessed to Lydia, and she admitted it herself. She said your parents are gone, and she's your only one, she could never abandon you, her feelings for you are different. Are you still trying to fool me?" Watching Cale's outburst, my eyes gradually darkened. But he paid no heed, continuing to shout, "It's your own fault your parents died. Why should Lydia bear the burden? Are you so pathetic that you need a woman to comfort you all the time? Or do you have ulterior motives, trying to take advantage of such a kind and innocent girl like Lydia?" As soon as he finished speaking, I grabbed him by the collar, lifted my gaze, my eyes icy cold, a cruel smile curling at the corner of my mouth. "Cale, Lydia is just playing hard to get. Do you want to know who she truly loves?" After I spoke, I threw a heavy punch at Cale's face. He fell to the ground, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. Lydia, seeing this from a distance, was horrified and rushed over, her face filled with anger. She pushed me aside, helped Cale up, and shouted at me, "Zach! Have you lost your mind? You actually hit someone just to keep me to yourself. I was so wrong about you. You're a twisted, heartless Yandere. I'm so disappointed in you." After shouting, Lydia's eyes were filled with tears, and she collapsed into Cale's arms as if heartbroken. Cale's face was full of joy as he said, "Lydia, so in your heart, I am the most important. I understand now, you were just testing me before." After saying this, he held Lydia tightly. Lydia tried to break free, but he only held her even tighter. She could only pretend to be angry and say, "Let go. I didn't mean it." But her demeanor made it seem like she was just being coquettish to anyone who saw her. I watched this affectionate couple speechlessly, feeling like I had become a character in their farce. I shook my head, no longer wanting to get involved in their affairs. Seeing my indifferent expression, Lydia called out unhappily, "Zach, I'll explain it to you when we get back." Facing Cale's fiery gaze, I quickly said, "No need to explain. I know you've always liked Cale. You were just testing him before. You made me give up the recommendation for him, that's such a deep love. I wish you two eternal happiness and a long life together." After saying that, I quickly walked away under Lydia's surprised and complicated gaze, leaving only Cale behind, looking at Lydia with emotion before kissing her deeply. Under his advances, Lydia gradually softened, completely lost herself, and even glanced at me in a daze. Last night, I exposed their hidden feelings, and Lydia stopped pretending to be reserved. They really got together. Over the next few dozen days, they openly held hands and fed each other snacks in class. Mia would always secretly observe my expression, and when she saw I didn't react much, she would quietly smile. Looking at her adorable appearance, my heart inexplicably stirred, and I even felt a hint of sweetness. I couldn't help but sigh. I'm already in my 30s, how could I still have such inappropriate thoughts about a young girl? There must be something wrong with my mindset. Zach, could you help me deliver the notebooks? Mia smiled as she looked at me. I responded a bit sluggishly, sure. But before I could stand up, Lydia slammed a thermos cup heavily on my desk and said provocatively, Zach, get me some water, I've finished mine. I glanced at her impatiently, picked up the notebooks, and walked away. Lydia got angry. Zach, what do you mean? Just because I'm in a relationship, you want to draw a line between us? I said expressionlessly, it's not because you're in a relationship, there have always been boundaries. Cale stormed over, snatched Lydia's water cup, and said, Zach, I know you're jealous of me, but there's no need to speak in such a sarcastic tone. Lydia looked at Cale with emotion. Cale, it's all my fault. I didn't balance love and friendship well, and I lost a friend. How annoying. Mia frowned and pulled me away. I looked at her tightly gripping my hand, and my heart stirred once again. Lydia's face turned pale, and just as she was about to say something more, she suddenly began to retch violently. She retched so hard that her legs gave way, and she collapsed into Cale's arms. Cale's expression changed drastically, and as soon as the teacher arrived, he immediately accompanied them to the hospital. I shook my head, thinking to myself that I could finally have some peace for a while. But the peace I had hoped for lasted only half a day. Before evening self-study, just as I had finished organizing my papers, I saw two people storming toward me angrily. A test report was flung heavily at me. Before I could even react, I heard a piercing stream of curses. Lydia's mother, her face twisted with rage and her eyes blazing with fury, shouted, Zach. After all these years of friendship between our families, you actually forced yourself on my daughter. Are you even human? If your parents knew about the despicable things you've done, they'd jump out of their graves and beat you to death, you beast. I gasped for breath, my expression darkening as I raised my head. How dare you insult my parents? What right do you have to speak about them? Lydia's mother grew even more furious, clutching her chest and panting heavily, Zach. A child's misbehavior is the father's fault. You've done such a despicable thing, and it's all because your parents didn't raise you properly. You must take responsibility. I was so angry I was about to stand up, but Mia stopped me. She opened the test report and exclaimed in surprise, pregnant. Lydia. I glanced at it and immediately understood what was going on. By then, everyone in the class was buzzing with discussion. Wow. Lydia is pregnant. Is it Zach's? They're playing it this big? Wasn't she with Cale? Did Cale get cheated on? With things blowing up like this, how will Zach even stay in school from now on? The teacher anxiously shouted, everyone shut up, go to the office now. I clenched the test report and kicked open the office door. As soon as I entered, Lydia's mother rushed forward to hit me. I firmly grabbed her hand, my gaze icy cold. Zach! How dare you stop me? You beast, you played with my daughter, got her pregnant with a bastard child, and now you want to deny it? How can society have scum like you? Lydia's mother trembled all over, glaring at me fiercely. I took a deep breath and said coldly, what makes you so sure it was me? Couldn't it have been someone else? As soon as I finished speaking, Lydia's father jumped out. With a shrewd look on his face, he licked his lips and said, it's written clearly in black and white, and Lydia has already said it, if it wasn't you, then who else could it be? Arguing about right and wrong now is pointless. Let's talk about how you plan to take responsibility. After saying this, a meaningful smile appeared on his face. Zach, I've watched you grow up. Don't worry, I'll make sure Lydia gets an abortion. As for the compensation for emotional distress, I won't ask for much, just 200,000. After all, Lydia's body has suffered. Hearing this, I felt both angry and amused. Lydia's mother had also calmed down a bit, but she still said viciously, you must pay the price. This is your compensation for my daughter. Anyway, your parents received a hefty payout from the car accident, so this amount is nothing to you. I was truly shocked by the shameless behavior of these two. No wonder Lydia was such an ungrateful wretch, it was a combination of inherited malice and the foolishness taught by example. The teacher hesitated for a moment and whispered, "Zach, you're my student, and I know your character. I don't believe you would do something like this." I gave the teacher a reassuring look, pointed toward the door, and shouted loudly, "Lydia! Stop hiding. Come out and explain this pregnancy situation clearly." Lydia had no choice but to walk out nervously, her face pale, and she forced herself to say, "What is there to explain? Isn't it already clear enough?" Lydia's parents immediately stepped forward to shield her, glaring at me fiercely and saying, "What? Are you trying to pressure my daughter? At this point, you still won't admit it? Do you believe I'll grab a megaphone and shout your disgraceful deeds all over the school, making sure you never hold your head up again for the rest of your life?" I sneered coldly, staring at Lydia and said, "Aren't you going to speak up? Do I have to expose you myself?" Lydia looked up in surprise, glared at me with hatred, and whispered, "Zach, you have to admit this is your child. Haven't you always liked me? Now I'm giving you this chance, don't push your luck." I didn't want to waste any more words on her and directly said to the teacher, "Let's do an amniocentesis. I'll cover the cost. This child isn't mine." My words made Lydia's parents widen their eyes in shock, their anger about to erupt again. Lydia also glared at me furiously. Just as they were about to start cursing again, Mia arrived. Panting, she raised her phone and angrily said, "You must not slander Zach anymore." I pulled up the classroom surveillance footage from this period, it's all on my phone. It clearly shows that Zach was discussing studies with me every night, he couldn't possibly have had time with Lydia. I was stunned, looking at the girl defending me, as if a beam of light was shining on her face. Lydia's mother spat, and only then did I snap out of it. I ignored them and directly pulled Cale, who was hiding at the door, out. I shouted at him sternly, "Isn't your love supposed to be passionate? You don't even dare to admit your own child." Cale was so frightened by me that he sat on the ground, covering his head with his hands, muttering, "My mom will kill me." It wasn't me. Lydia, who still wanted to put on a show, immediately lost her composure and said through gritted teeth, "I was actually planning to cover for you, Cale. You're not a man." Everyone understood, and Lydia's parents turned pale and then flushed with anger. The tense atmosphere persisted until Cale's mother arrived. What followed was laughable. Lydia's parents frantically demanded money, Lydia was thoroughly humiliated, Cale remained silent, and their so-called great love was branded with shame. I saw Lydia again just a few days before the college entrance exams. She had just recovered from an abortion, looking pale and listless, but perked up a bit when she saw me. She grabbed my sleeve and said pitifully, "Zach, you haven't come to see me all day. Are you really angry?" "It's my fault, I didn't wait for her to finish speaking and impatiently pulled back my sleeve. Then, I took out an exquisite thermos from my pocket and handed it to her. This was the hot soup that Mia had carefully prepared early in the morning. Lydia's face twisted, her eyes glaring at Mia like daggers. I immediately stepped in front of Mia and said impatiently, "If you have nothing to do, leave. Don't cause trouble here." Lydia was stunned. She looked at me, then at Mia, her chest heaving, her body trembling slightly. Her lips moved a few times before she finally blurted out anxiously, "You used to do all these things for me. Zach. I was wrong. I never actually liked Cale. He was like a clingy dog, pestering me, and I had no choice but to make a mistake. That bastard has no sense of responsibility. I saw it clearly that day, when his mother spoke to me like that, he didn't even stand up for me. He's just a coward. Zach, don't treat me like this, don't use Mia to upset me. I'm really hurt." I glanced at her disdainfully, not wanting to say another word, and pointed behind her. Cale stood there, fists clenched, his eyes bloodshot as he glared at her. Lydia's face turned even paler before she was abruptly dragged away by the furious Cale. After that day, I didn't see Lydia for 3 days straight, and I breathed a slight sigh of relief. Then, on the day before the college entrance exam, my teacher found me and handed me a fruit basket, saying, "Zach, on behalf of the class, go visit Lydia. She was in a car accident and was seriously injured." I took the fruit basket, a bit surprised that Lydia had been in a car accident. Unlike in my previous life, this time she wasn't in a vegetative state, she had suffered a high-level amputation. When I arrived at the hospital room, I intended to just leave the fruit basket and go, but Lydia suddenly opened her eyes and called out to me. I was startled to see how much she had deteriorated in just a few days. Her shoulder blades were prominent, her face was pale, and she looked utterly haggard and disoriented. She struggled to prop up her frail body, looking at me with tearful eyes as she cried, "Zach, I miss you so much. What should I do? I have no legs. I'm crippled for life. Zach, save me, you will save me, won't you?" I lowered my gaze, sighed, and said, "Lydia, what's done is done. Accept reality. It's better than being completely paralyzed. Learn to live in a wheelchair from now on." After saying that, I turned to leave, but she grabbed my wrist tightly, her fingers turning white, and my arm trembled along with hers. Lydia pleaded urgently, "Zach, how can I live in a wheelchair? It's impossible. I'm useless now, Zach. Are you going to leave me too?" I slowly pried her fingers off, using my actions to show her my decision. Lydia completely broke down. She buried her head in her hands and wailed, "Zach. You promised to protect me for a lifetime. Have you forgotten all of that?" After crying, she pleaded desperately, "Zach, I don't believe you would abandon me. My parents don't want me, and Cale, that bastard, is hiding. You're all I have left. Zach, please don't take the college entrance exam, okay? Let's get married, okay? Just like you wished for every year, I'll say yes, I'll marry you. Zach, let's never be apart again, okay?" She cried as if her heart were breaking, filled with fear and hope, a side of her I had never seen before. In the past, even a single tear from her would have shattered my heart. But now, all I felt was sorrow. The Zach who was willing to give up everything and sacrifice it all for her was already dead, dead in the neglect of over a decade, dead in the humiliation of having his sincerity trampled upon. I didn't linger. I walked away resolutely, ignoring Lydia's heart-wrenching cries behind me. She completely lost control, struggling and collapsing to the ground, letting out a painful wail. But in the end, I didn't look back. Making the wrong choice once was enough, loving someone to the point of self-abasement, only to realize that no one loves you when you're in the dust. The college entrance exam was over, and both Mia and I had scored excellent results. 7 exam papers brought this summer to an end, but Mia's and my story was just beginning. We had been in university for over 3 months now. After I received my admission letter, I confessed my feelings to Mia. It's quite laughable, really, a man in his 30s at heart, yet I was as nervous and excited as an inexperienced young boy. Perhaps it was because I had met someone as wonderful as Mia that I felt a bit unworthy. Mia leaned against me and showed me a piece of news, and I froze. It was about Lydia. I hadn't paid much attention to her for a long time, and seeing news about her suddenly, I was surprised to realize that in just 3 months, her image in my mind had already grown hazy. None of that mattered now. What mattered was that she had publicly tearfully accused Cale, the young master of the vast Mu group, of causing her to have both legs amputated, and she had even recorded him insulting her. In the video, Cale looked at the weathered Lydia in the wheelchair with disgust, as if she were something filthy, and humiliated her from head to toe. The video quickly went viral, causing significant damage to the reputation of vast Mu group. I heard that Cale's family, in an effort to salvage their image, had fitted Lydia with the latest prosthetic limbs. Mia watched and cursed, that Cale has never been a good person. It's good that he's been exposed now. He probably won't dare to insult people so casually in the future. Lydia has had it tough too. I hugged her and smiled, urging her not to pay attention anymore. But this video seemed like an omen. The next day, as Mia and I were leaving the library, we saw Lydia. She was trembling all over, seemingly very agitated, and walked toward us step by step. The moment she saw me, her eyes lit up. "Zach, I can finally stand up and come find you. Do you know how long I've waited for this day? Zach, I can live, I can take care of myself. I'm not a burden. You. She was speaking excitedly when she suddenly stopped, noticing my hand tightly holding Mia's. Lydia began to tremble, tears streaming down her face as she choked out a few words from her dry throat. You're together. How could this be? I looked at the strange glances around us, wrapped my arm around Mia, and walked over, saying coldly, Lydia, there has never been anything between us, not in the past, and there won't be in the future. Please don't say strange things in public and cause my girlfriend to be gossiped about. My words completely shattered Lydia. She collapsed to the ground, covering her mouth with her hand, her eyes filled with panic. The people around whispered and pointed. My face turned ashen as I pulled Mia away. Lydia, for some inexplicable reason, suddenly grabbed Mia and pleaded desperately, can you give Zach back to me? You're so smart, with a good family and a bright future. He's all I have. Give him back to me. I'll give you anything you want. I was really angry and was about to pull her away when Mia said, if you love him so much, then why did you throw the bracelet Zach carefully made for your birthday into the trash? Why did you mock the meals he paid the cafeteria to specially make for you, saying they weren't as refined as Kale's? Why did he remember all your preferences, even your menstrual cycle, while you didn't even know he had gastritis? What right do you have to say you love him? Mia spoke with righteous conviction, each word hitting Lydia like a hammer, shattering her defenses. She weakly let go, shaking her head in regret, unable to refute a single word. Finally, she looked up, her eyes filled with confusion, reluctance, and remorse. She knew she had lost completely. She staggered to her feet, stumbling away as if all her strength had been drained, leaving behind only an empty shell. I didn't pay her any mind, instead holding Mia tightly in my arms. The love in my heart surged like a tidal wave, almost bursting through my chest. Mia smiled, her eyes shining like stars, her love pouring from her gaze. She whispered softly in my ear, what others discard as worthless is a priceless treasure to me. Mia and I never argued during our 4 years of college. She was gentle and considerate, while I was clumsy and awkward. In her words, I was a lovable fool, a clingy person. She was always concerned about my gastritis and made nourishing stomach soup for me every day. I often felt grateful, wondering how I deserved her affection. Compared to her love, my past life experiences seemed insignificant. We worked hard to shine in our respective fields. After graduation, I received a job offer for a top-tier computer programming position, while Mia stayed at the university to conduct research with her mentor. In my second year of work, I couldn't wait to propose to her. I handed over all my savings, my salary card, and even the property to Mia. She also contributed her own savings, and we pooled them together. We were full of hope for the future, firmly believing that we were each other's true love. The name Lydia had long since faded from my mind, and the pain she brought me had already healed. My hatred for her had vanished, a stranger wasn't worth my resentment. I thought I would never cross paths with her again in this lifetime, but unexpectedly, I saw her 3 years later, and she looked utterly disheveled. Mia and I were trying on wedding dresses when I saw Lydia desperately clinging to Kale, weeping uncontrollably. Kale, with a glamorous woman in his arms, shouted in disgust, "How dare you show up, you cripple? What are you doing here? I'll have you know, today is my fiancé's wedding dress fitting. Don't make a scene here. Get out of my sight." Lydia shook her head frantically, clutching his leg as she sobbed, "Kale, didn't you say you'd only love me in this lifetime? I lost my legs for you, and I love you so much. You can't treat me like this." Kale's face was full of disgust as he kicked Lydia away and wiped his shoe. "Don't touch me, you're so filthy. Working that kind of job at the bar, who knows how many diseases you've picked up. Disgusting. Get out of here right now." Lydia's expression suddenly changed, a fierce smile spreading across her face. "Kale, you heartless beast. You ruined me, you ruined my love, you made me lose the one I loved. You'll get what's coming to you." Kale was so angry he wanted to hit her, but then he remembered the previous public backlash and had to call security to throw Lydia out. Lydia said coldly, "No need, I'll leave on my own. I'll watch you burn in hell." As she turned to leave, she saw me and froze in place. Her face was filled with shock and confusion, her eyes brimming with regret, weariness, fear, and guilt. Finally, she glanced at Mia in her wedding dress and staggered away. I shook my head and pulled Mia along, heading to another shop. Mia was deeply moved, sighing over Lydia's current situation. I held her hand tightly and said, "Don't think about it anymore. Everyone makes their own choices and must take responsibility for them. Cheer up, let's send out the invitations." Mia nodded firmly and leaned into my embrace. The day before the wedding, I received a call from the police. "Sir, this is the police station. Sorry to bother you, but we'd like to ask what Lydia means to you. She's currently attempting suicide and specifically asked to see you. We hope you can cooperate." I hung up the phone and told Mia with a furrowed brow. Mia grabbed my hand and urged, "This is a matter of life and death. No matter what foolish things she's done, don't dwell on them now." We hurried to the 18-story high platform in the city center, where Lydia was drinking and staggering along the edge. When she saw me, she paused for a moment, then laughed self-mockingly, "Zach, you finally came. I thought you wouldn't show up. Are you happy to see me like this, about to die?" I frowned and said seriously, "Lydia, stop joking around. Come down quickly. Whatever it is, let's talk it out properly." Lydia began laughing hysterically, her mouth stretched wide, laughing until she cried, "Zach, how can we talk it out properly? How? Are you just going to ignore the fact that I betrayed you and tormented you for over a decade?" My heart sank, and I asked tremblingly, "You came back too?" "Ha ha ha, yes, I'm back, and of all times, I've returned to this state. Isn't it retribution? You don't know, do you? I later became a vegetable, rotting away at home with no one to care for me. How ridiculous. It's so laughable, the person I once looked down on turned out to be the salvation of my life, and I actually betrayed him to be with the murderer. It's all retribution, ha ha ha." Lydia had completely lost her mind. Her laughter was piercing and filled with sorrow. Mia glanced at me, puzzled, and advised, "Lydia, don't be impulsive. You're still young, and your prosthetic is in place. You have plenty of time ahead of you. Don't do anything foolish." Lydia suddenly stopped laughing and looked at Mia with envy. "You're truly fortunate. You have better judgment than I do, and you know how to cherish. I really can't compare to you." How ironic, by the time I realized my regret, it was already too late. You've firmly taken your place by his side. This is heaven's punishment for me. I accept it. After speaking, she closed her eyes in relief, took a deep breath, and looked at me affectionately, saying, "Zach, I've avenged you. Cale bullied you, and I secretly injected him with a needle containing HIV. I'll take him with me to atone for what he did to you." After saying that, she jumped off the high platform without hesitation. As Lydia resolutely leaped from the platform, time seemed to freeze in that instant. Mia clung tightly to me, her body trembling slightly. I gently stroked her back, trying to calm her down. This unexpected incident cast a shadow over what was supposed to be a joyful wedding preparation, but I knew life had to go on. Mia and I still held our wedding as scheduled. That night, Mia held on to me tightly, refusing to let go. I looked at her wearily and said, "Mia, ask whatever you want to ask." Mia didn't speak, just looked at me deeply and said softly, "Honey, I don't want to ask. It's enough for me that you're by my side in this lifetime. No matter how unpleasant the past may have been, what matters most is that we know, love, and stay with each other in this life." Emotions welled up inside me, clogging my throat and leaving me speechless. This burning love from the depths of her soul filled me with guilt. All I could do was hold her tightly and promise her a lifetime together. Through spring, summer, autumn, and winter, the years passed by. Our future still stretched long ahead of us.